listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Whether your feed is filled with celebrities, health, posts about saving the environment or politics, a massive amount of what you're engaging with is actually fake. Everything from the content itself to the likes, views, and even the comments.
It's basically the idea that, increasingly, almost everything you interact with on the internet is not human. It's some kind of bot. Obviously, when you log onto social media, not everyone is a bot. But I think there is something to it.
So why is it happening and who's behind it? Find out in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Tuesday, the 20th of May.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, residents in parts of New South Wales are evacuating this morning due to severe weather and flooding that's lashed the mid-north coast in recent days and is expected to continue moving north. Hundreds of calls have been made to the SES with a watch and act warning issued for Kempsey, Port Macquarie, Taree, Gloucester and Foster, while residents in the Hunter region were asked to leave just before midnight last night due to rising floodwaters there too.
Some of the areas have recorded around 180 millimetres of rain in just 24 hours, with the same amount of rainfall expected to fall today. More than 16 rescues have already been carried out, mainly for people not following advice and entering floodwaters, while 26 local state schools have been closed. Emergency services have warned locals who ignore evacuation warnings could become trapped without power, water or other essentials, and rescuers may not be able to reach them.
The Bondi Junction attack inquest's expected to hear from more expert witnesses today after failings by the Westfield Shopping Centre's security on the day were laid bare. Yesterday, an international counter-terrorism expert told the inquest a security guard who'd been watching over CCTV at the time of the stabbings wasn't competent and failed on multiple fronts. He told the court the woman needed more training, didn't have the required skill set for the job, and had gone to the toilet 40 seconds before Joel Couchy stabbed his first victim.
A 000 call made by the woman to police was played to the court, where she can be heard telling authorities there's an armed offender, 3 to 4 people had been injured and 2 stabbed, and incorrectly telling them shots had been fired. The counter-terrorism expert says the call was made too late, was unclear, and risked confusing police on the scene, who could have been led to believe there was an armed gunman still on the loose. The inquest heard changes to the shopping centre security have since been made, with 2 people now expected to remain in the control room at all times.
To the Middle East now, where Israel has issued evacuation orders for Gaza's second largest city, Khan Yunis, having led airstrikes that have killed more than 80 people in the region overnight. And despite calls from the international community, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has continued to insist Israel will control all of Gaza, saying in a video message that they are headed towards complete victory.
It comes as the leaders of the UK, France and Canada have issued a fresh joint statement warning Israel they will take further concrete actions if the IDF does not stop its attacks on Gaza and lifts aid restrictions, condemning Tel Aviv's operation as disproportionate while describing the level of human suffering as intolerable. As for Australia's part, Foreign Minister Penny Wong issued a joint statement alongside 21 other foreign ministers from around the globe yesterday, expressing similar sentiment, calling for the resumption of aid, as well as a ceasefire and a return to talks of a 2-state solution, saying the population is on the brink of starvation.
And it's understood that limited aid, so around 9 to 20 trucks, should be getting into the region in the next few hours, which pales in comparison to the 500 to 600 that went in a day before the start of the war.
Back home now and changing pace, there could be some extra relief today for mortgage holders, with the Reserve Bank expected to cut the cash rate. If they do, it'll be the second cut this year after 13 rate hikes since May 2022. Economists are predicting to see a 0.25% cut, bringing the cash rate below 4% for the first time in almost 2 years. Athena's Nathan Wilson says it's hoped that'll be just the beginning.
I think there is an expectation that this will only be a start, that we should be expecting to get 3 or possibly 4 more cuts this year. And clearly that will really add up.
Now, for those less in the know about interest rates, essentially lower rates can mean a couple of things. It can help buyers borrow bigger amounts of money to purchase homes. But on the other hand, that rise in buyer interest also increases the demand for properties. So it can lead to a lift then in the property prices as a result. And we know property prices are already at record highs nationally. So As buyers, we do not want that, Chris, but for owners, obviously that is a plus. But look, there's hopes that we'll see 2 more cuts before Chrissy, but if history is anything to go by, the RBA has been known to go against the grain and economists' predictions before.
Yeah, and they are saying with such global uncertainty right now, tariff wars, Donald Trump, it's really, really hard to know for sure whether those will be on the table by the end of the year. But look, time will tell, and fingers crossed for some good news today. I am not a mortgage holder, but lower bills I can get around, Tara. So here's to you, and hopefully if you do get a rate cut today, hopefully you pass it on to your renters if you have any.
And Telstra is continuing to deny allegations today that it's misled Australians after Vodafone launched a complaint with the competition watchdog over its coverage. TPG, the owner of Voda, wrote to the ACCC last week alleging that Telstra had engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct for more than 15 years. By overstating the reach of its mobile network by as much as 40%. And according to Telstra's historically advertised claim, they cover 99.7% of the Australian population, Chris. But a claim they updated just this month has added the caveat that the number was based on consumers using an external antenna or a booster. And if you drop the boosters, you only get around 1.9 million square kilometres of coverage, not the 3 million as advertised. Very important detail there.
Yeah. Detail schmeek, Telstra said. I just love this. I love that this has come out, and it's mostly selfishly because the amount of times I've been out with mates, I've had no service because I'm with Optus, and they go, it's time to get on Telstra. It's the best provider in Australia. Well, is it? I mean, allegedly. I raised the question, is it? And look, I just think top line, the fact that this was brought by another company complaining about it, giving them a competitive edge. So, TPG said it gives Telstra a competitive edge by lying and misleading. It's just so very Black Mirror. It's so very dystopian to me that we're at this point where corporate interests are the only reason that this is going before a watchdog, and it's not because it's, shortchanging Australians and lying to Australians.
We don't care about your competitive edge. We care about our phone bills. And I'm sorry, denying it's misleading. Sorry, everyone, we didn't tell you the coverage. You have to stand on your car, arm out, hold the antenna to the right, and you might get $1. Come on. Anyway, that brings our headlines to a close today. Next up is my deep dive, looking into the world of media manipulation and how much of what you see when you scroll is actually real. Well, not as much as you think. Have a listen to that up next.
I'm definitely voting Labor.
You have my vote.
Go Libs.
Go Libs.
These are just some of the hundreds of comments left on our politicians' social media pages in recent months, often on posts with thousands of likes and sometimes hundreds of thousands of views. But how much of it is real? When I click onto some of the profiles engaging with these pages, there are a bunch that just don't seem legit. Some accounts comment the same thing as other users, some have no photo, no posts, little to no followers, and their accounts say they were created in March and April this year. Funnily, that's just before our election campaign. So how do we tell if a profile is real or it's a bot? And why does it matter? Helping us unpack that today is QUT digital media researcher Professor Timothy Graham, who's studied online bots and the world of social media manipulation. Dr. Graham, thank you so much for joining me on The Briefing. How much of what we see on social media is real and how much is from bots?
Well, that's a really good question. There's a big theory going around at the moment called the dead internet theory, which I think speaks a lot to the kind of concerns that people have. It's basically the idea that increasingly almost everything you interact with on the internet is not human. It's some kind of bot. Now, I think that's kind of overblown. Obviously, when you log onto social media, not everyone is a bot. But I think there is something to it that increasingly we see, now that we have ChatGPT, now that we have scheduling software, it's a lot easier to be able to generate content. There's a lot of automation happening on the internet today, and increasingly the account that you see replying on some post, very likely could be automated in some way.
How prolific is it, and what areas is it used most on social media?
It's a great question. And I think the question about how prolific is it kind of depends on the context. So I think when you talk about politics, for example, one of the things that we found is that a lot of people, they kind of act like bots, right? So there's a small core of like super online people who reply to everything. They kind of copy paste things, they repeat themselves constantly because they're so passionate about these issues and they have such a clear message that they just want to keep repeating over and over. I would say they're not as prevalent as you think they probably are. I would say, maybe 2 to 3% maybe of accounts on X or something or a platform like that, very political kind of platform, would be bots. But in other areas, like if you're talking about like finance advice or cryptocurrency or something like that, I would conservatively put the figure at something like 10 to 15% of accounts are probably bots, purely because of like the amount of money that you can make from being super active in that space.
And we've seen them be used before for things like spreading disinformation, like astroturfing, even in smear campaigns for high-profile legal cases. Do you think there's any ethical issues around it if they're being used by, say, organisations, agencies, media teams to, whether it just be inflate the look of someone's popularity or as a targeted campaign?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And let's be kind of clear-headed about this. Public relations as a kind of discipline or practice, there's PR firms everywhere, and they basically do the job of trying to polish the apple for companies, trying to get an idea out there, trying to manage brands and things like that, and have always used different kinds of technologies. Every trick in the book has been honed to perfection in some of these disciplines. Marketing and PR is probably the key examples. So, when we get to something like bots, it's not a question of like, okay, are PR and marketing firms doing something really bad now? It's just a question of like, how does the ethical practices that they have and the ethical codes and the codes of conduct, and then of course the law, how does that factor into how do they use bots? And I think the one thing that kind of, to me, separates bots from some of these earlier technologies is the traceability aspect. So it's really difficult to be able to pinpoint. For example, if you're having a conversation about like, I don't know, Johnny Depp online, or Amber Heard is a better example. And then suddenly you see all of these accounts come in and they look kind of dodgy. They've been created recently. They have like fake profile pictures or no profile pictures, and they're just saying the same things over and over again. Who's driving those? And I think this is one of the key issues, is that in advertising, at least there was this kind of like paper trail that could be followed. It may be hard to follow in some cases, but with bot accounts, you don't have that. You kind of get to this point where it's kind of a black hole and you can't follow it any further. And I think that this level of deception, I think, has opened up a whole new world of dark advertising and dark political communication. It's kind of like this new world that we're in a little bit, which I do think is kind of, qualitatively different from what we've seen in the past.
You looked into this in US politics, I understand, but there's been some accusations thrown around a bit closer to home that bots are being either used by or to target our own politicians because there'd been some spam and bot accounts engaging with some of their pages. How can we tell, and are there any ways that we can actually prevent it?
Well, it's a wicked problem. It's a really hard problem because who's responsible for doing that? At the moment, it's platforms, right? So we rely on them. They're like little empires that operate according to their own rules. They are the ones that set the rules and policies for their platform. They're the ones that set the terms of service. So some platforms like kind of welcome fake accounts, like X, for example. If you go and read the rules and policies there, it actually says that you can create up to like 10 alternate accounts because engagement is great. Like if you've got more people coming to your platform, that's more ads being served, that's more people clicking on stuff. And what do we do about this? So I guess some of the issues is that there's a real balancing act that needs to be made between how authoritarian you are, right, in sort of curtailing free speech and saying, okay, if you sign up to platforms, you have to use your phone number and you have to use like your identity and you have to do that kind of thing. And we have a model for that, and it's called, the People's Republic of China, right? So platforms like Weibo in China, like that's kind of the Chinese Twitter, if you like, have these systems in place where, if you say something, you can be tracked straight away because you need to have signed up using your, I think, social security number and your mobile phone and everything like that, right? And obviously, the flip side to that is, whilst you can crack down on like bots and things like that, you can also crack down on like political dissent or someone saying something about, a particular politician that they don't like. And then the police turn up at your door and, that's probably not the kind of society that we want to be living in free liberal democracy. So, that's a long answer to the question, but I think it's this balancing act that we haven't quite figured out yet, right? Where we want to enable people to create anonymous or pseudonymous accounts, if you want to participate in an area without fear of retaliation. But the flip side to that is that it also enables weaponizing anonymity and weaponizing pseudonymity. And I think it's really problematic that during elections we see this kind of thing. I don't think anyone, regardless of which political party you come from or who you are, should not be subjected to hate speech or to abuse online. It's unacceptable. I think we need to focus on changing the culture. I think that's probably where things come down to, as much as changing the platforms and changing the technology.
I guess if you're just the average Joe scroller on your feed, are there any ways that people can try to discern what's real from what's fake?
When you're scrolling through your feed, if you come across content that really gives you that gut reaction, right, that you start to sweat a little bit, or you get super emotionally activated about something, like you really feel like, oh yeah, that's 100% true, I need to support that, I need to amplify that straight away, or you feel, oh, that's absolutely disgusting, I absolutely hate that, that's vile. Probably my biggest tip is that as soon as you feel those things coming on, the first question you should ask is, what might be the intentions behind the actor online that's posting that? Slowing down and just taking one beat or two beats to think, okay, hold on a second, why did I just have my dopamine levels spike by 10,000%, right? Or my anger levels, get triggered by 10,000%. Maybe you should think about like what that is. And before you do anything about it, just investigate. And the people that do that can often uncover bot networks, so there's plenty of examples. I wrote about one in a chapter recently in a book called The Age of Doubt. And it was all about a bot network that was just spreading garbage content about the Great Barrier Reef. And there's a reef scientist named Professor Terry Hughes. He's one of the most well-known people in Australia and the world in the area. And he was, basically, he couldn't believe that there was all of these like people, what looked like people, kind of harping on about the Great Barrier Reef and saying things that weren't true. And it turned out to basically be like a ChatGPT crypto network. And they were just jumping onto any random hashtag, but it was getting people's attention. It was activating them. I actually verified it, and it was ChatGPT 3.5 model. And but people were kind of like engaging with it as though their bot network was trying to like do something, but it was actually just garbage. They were just trying to basically create these fake accounts by getting them to post about anything to make them look human.
Which is even more concerning, because that just means it's completely false content that's being circulated to mass amounts of people and shaping public opinion, really. If it's being done for that, I'd hate to think what else is being said that's untrue about every other political and social issue that's out there. But great insight nonetheless. Professor, really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for joining me on The Briefing.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Tara. It's great to chat.
That was QUT digital media researcher Dr. Timothy Graham speaking with me there about the world of bots and social media manipulation. If you enjoyed this ep of The Briefing, don't forget to leave us a comment or a review. Or you can follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.
Listener.